Chad. I'm the founder of North Shore Sauna. Today we're going to be going over our tent sauna stove, a few related accessories, and getting a fire started. So this is our standard size sauna tent stove. It's entirely stainless steel with a 3.5-inch chimney, and it's suitable for our dome sauna tent, our Nova 6 sauna tent, and our Nova 4 sauna tent. Our mini cube sauna tent has a similar stove, but smaller in size. So we're going to go over a few of the more obvious features. We'll light a fire, show some different accessories, and talk about some of the finer details of using a wood-fired stove. So as you can see, the stove is on legs. There's 4 legs, and they fold up flat to the bottom of the stove when the stove's not in use to make it more portable and compact. Here at the top of the stove, you can see there's this rectangular hole. This is a carry handle. There's another one at the back of the stove, so you can carry it front and rear. I would recommend always using gloves. So we sell these leather gloves. They are great for protecting your hands from any sharp edges, as well as from the heat. Once the fire gets going, the stove gets extremely hot. The door here, pretty simple, has a simple latch. It does have an intake damper, and this allows you to control the flow of air into the fire. So as we know, fire needs fuel and air to combust, and so having the damper open like this allows for maximum airflow. Closing the damper slows down the rate of burn. There are also 3 holes on top of the door, and this is for an air wash. So when the fire's lit, it's pulling in fresh air, and it keeps the glass in the door from getting too sooty and blocking the view. We also have an ash pan. It's entirely removable. As you burn fires in the stove, you create ash and it will fall into the ash pan. You can easily slide that out, dump the ash somewhere suitable. It doesn't need to be emptied every time, but once the ash pan gets full, it can begin to obstruct airflow and cause the ash to build up in the firebox. On the top here, we have our rock basket. It can hold 40-ish pounds of stone. You can get more if you really pile it up. But yeah, it contains the rocks. It keeps the rocks from falling down in between the stove body and the heat shields, as well as allows you to get more rocks on top of the stove. So we're going to open up the stove, take out the chimney pipe. As you can see inside the stove, the chimney pipe, it comes with 6 pieces of chimney pipe, and they all fit inside the stove. The stove also comes with this rain cap, and it has mesh to block any large embers coming out of the chimney. Take out the chimney pipe. This piece of pipe is different from the other 5, and it has a damper inside. It also has a bulge here at this end of the pipe, and it prevents this pipe from sliding any further into the stove body when we install the chimney. So we want to ensure that this damper is vertical, parallel with the pipe itself. We can install it into the stove. We'll remove the remainder of the chimney pipes. So now we have all the chimney pipes out, and one thing we want to do is inspect the inside of the chimney pipes. With use, creosote will build up on the inside of the pipes, and eventually it can actually restrict the airflow and impair the amount of heat that we can get out of the stove, as well as cause potential fire hazards. And by that I mean the creosote can build up thick on the inside of the chimney if not properly maintained. And then if something hits the chimney, or it wiggles around, or if it just gets enough in there that it falls off of its own accord, It'll usually do so when it's really, really hot, when the stove's burning, and those embers can then go up the chimney and out the top, potentially fall on the roof of our sauna or anywhere around in the area. So these chimney pipes look pretty clean. We're gonna go ahead and stack the chimney up. So at this point, I've noticed that the chimney doesn't quite align with the chimney hole, so I have to adjust the stove just a little bit in order to get it to do that. Okay. Slide the next piece of chimney out the hole and then into the bell end of this piece here. And then we go outside to finish stacking the chimney, put the chimney cap on. If for any reason you feel the need to move the stove to a different location in the tent, you need to shift it over a foot in one direction or another, you can use 2 of these 45-degree bends, and these go in between 2 chimney pipes. So we're gonna move the stove over just a bit and show you how that might look. So we'll begin by just putting the 45 into our first piece there. Move our stove over just a little bit. We'll adjust that as necessary. Okay, so those are a nice tight fit. Our other 45 there pointing directly up. And I actually have all 3 pieces here vertical. So as you can see, it just allows us to shift our stove over if you need a little bit more space in the other part of the tent. You can also use these above the tent in case you need to divert the chimney to one side or another for any reason. I also want to showcase our water heater, and this goes in place of one of the chimney pieces. See, the chimney goes all the way through, and installing it here, the spigot to one side, allows you to stack the remainder of your chimney pipe up. You can fill it with water here, and then when the fire's going, it heats the water, and you're able to dispense the water here into a bucket or whatever you'd like. It holds 5 liters of water. It's entirely stainless steel. There's a handle on the top for if you filled it elsewhere and then carried it over to install it. So I do want to mention that there's a silicone washer in between the spigot and the tank, and so it is recommended that you keep water in it anytime the fire's hot. If you're not planning to use the water heater, just remove it before lighting your fire. Just use the chimney pipe. If the silicone washer gets too hot due to there not being any water in the tank and having the fire going for an extended period of time, it can damage that washer and the tank can leak. So once the water heater's in place, we can continue stacking the chimney just as if there was just a regular chimney piece here. And now we'll go outside and we'll finish stacking the chimney, place the rain cap on top as well. We're gonna finish stacking up the chimney, and there's a couple ways to do this. So here you can see we have one chimney piece already protruding through the tent. We have 2 pieces remaining plus our chimney cap. We're just gonna put this all together. And then install this entire piece like that. If you're vertically challenged, it might be a bit difficult. So what you can do is put these final 3 together with the chimney cap, slide the entire piece through the hole, and then go back inside the tent and attach the 2 pieces together. And of course, this is by yourself. If you have a second person that can be inside the tent while you're feeding this in from the outside, that can also make the whole process a lot easier. So the rain cap is provided with every stove. It also has mesh around the outlet, as we mentioned earlier, and that prevents any large embers from coming out. So as I said, a rain cap, right? It prevents rain from going down into the chimney itself. You don't absolutely need to use the rain cap, but if you live in an area where it's often raining and you're going to be leaving your sauna tent up in the backyard, it's recommended that you put the rain cap on the top of the chimney to prevent the moisture from getting down inside your stove. Just as we mentioned earlier, performing proper maintenance on the inside of your chimney pipe so creosote doesn't build up inside the pipe, you also need to do so with the cap and that mesh. So especially if you're burning wet wood or over longer periods of time, soot can build up on the mesh and restrict the airflow. So you need to keep an eye on the mesh. If it's starting to get dirty, sooty, just take it off periodically, make sure you clean it off to ensure proper airflow. So now we're ready to go start our fire. So once we have the stove in place and the chimney stacked up, we can fill the rock basket with our sauna rocks. Okay. There's more heat toward the rear of the stove, around the chimney. So if you put more rocks here, you'll get more heat, more hot rocks, really. And that'll allow you to make better and more steam during your sauna session. So now we're going to get this fire started, and the first thing we want to do is gather our firewood, specifically some really small pieces that will ignite easily. Just going to split this piece up. It has some nice lines. I don't know if you can see that. So these lines indicate how the grain of the wood is, and if you split with the grain, it will split much easier than otherwise. Also want a firm surface on which to split your firewood. Placing it directly on the ground doesn't work very well because the ground is kind of spongy. So I'm putting the firewood on the other piece of wood to support it. Also, don't cut yourself. All right, I think we've got enough small pieces of wood here, so we're going to go ahead and get this firebox loaded up and get this fire started. Okay, so I just want to mention that there are two different ways of loading the firebox and getting the fire started. Traditionally, you begin with very, very small pieces, such as we split, kindling, on the bottom with some easily combustible material, paper, fire starter, fat wood, and then placing progressively larger pieces on top, especially as the fire gets established. There's also the opposite way of doing it. It's commonly referred to as the upside down fire method. You begin by placing actually much larger pieces on the bottom and then placing larger or smaller and smaller pieces on the top, and then you place your fire starter in the midst of that. And proponents of that method say that you get a lot less smoke, and it's just as or more effective at just getting the fire going, and potentially even easier. So we're just going to do it the traditional way. A lot of small pieces with a fire starter, and then we'll add larger pieces. So we're going to place one piece that's a little bit larger in there first. Bit of a diagonal, just to prop all these smaller pieces on, so we can have a little cavity in between them, kind of underneath them. If it cracks like a fire when you break it, it will probably burn well in a fire. It's a good indication. If you've ever tried to break a green or wet branch or piece of wood, it just bends. But this made a nice loud snap when I broke it, indicating it's dry and ready for burning. All right, so we've got a nice lattice of kindling and small dry pieces of hardwood in there. Today we have some fire starters. We also have a torch. And quite frankly, this is the easiest way to start a fire. Is just go get yourself a, I don't know if this is $20 at your local home improvement hardware store. Propane, there's a few different gases. It's very effective, it's very easy, and highly recommend just using a torch. If you go the fire starter route, you can get these for 50 cents a piece, $1 a piece. They also work very well and maybe a little bit more convenient for some people. You can just place them in there, quickly ignite them, and then you can just walk away, essentially. With a torch, you do have to sit here for a little bit to try and get everything ignited. But you can just stay here and ensure that everything gets going, whereas with the fire starter, there's a chance that it won't ignite, although most of the fire starters these days work really well. So this is a Volcano fire starter, not affiliated in any way, just fantastic fire starters. But there are a huge number of options out there, and we don't have much of a preference, quite frankly. These are a little bit on the maybe higher end side, you might say. Any hardware store, home improvement store will have a bunch of options. I wouldn't say they all work equally well, but they all work pretty well and kind of get what you pay for, I suppose. So we just tuck that underneath and we'll actually light it with the torch anyway, but it'll just be real quick, get it lit, and that's all we got to do. So now we'll give that just a minute or two to ignite all of our kindling. We have our damper wide open to allow for maximum airflow, which you should always do when getting your fire started. We've made sure that the damper in the chimney is wide open. The ash pan, you can open it just a little bit. It'll actually allow a little bit more air in that way, or just leave it closed. It doesn't make a significant difference. It looks like our fire starter is working really well with our really dry firewood. And I would say that's the biggest factor in getting a fire started, as well as producing quality heat, is dry firewood. So we recommend dry hardwood. In our area, birch, ash, and oak are all readily available. I know different types of firewood are, more available in different areas, but the biggest thing is that it's dry. If you have any moisture or water in the wood that you're trying to burn, the heat has to push that water out. And you can often see that if you're trying to burn wet wood. If you look at the end of the piece of wood, when it's in the fire, you'll see water actually bubbling out of the end of the wood, and you can hear it kind of popping and sizzling. And so you're expending energy to do that before the wood itself can be burnt. So it's very clear that the fire has started. It's burning quite well. We can hear our stove start to heat up and pop and hear the fire crackling. And so we're gonna put some larger pieces of wood in and one more. Always use gloves for safety. Okay, so now that we've gotten a few large pieces of wood in there, we'll leave the damper wide open, really let the fire become established, and let our sauna heat. And with our setup here, the space itself it'll probably be 180, 200 degrees in here in 10 minutes or so. Our saunas heat up incredibly fast. And you could actually we could begin using this sauna in about 10 minutes when it's hot enough. Although the rocks themselves will take a while longer. We usually recommend waiting 40 minutes or so from starting the fire to before you throw any steam. The rocks, because they're so dense and there's so many of them, they take quite a while longer to soak in enough heat to really provide a good steam. But the space itself will be hot enough. We can get in here, we can start getting a good sweat going on the bench, and maybe just throw steam, you know, our second round or a little later. Our stove body, the firebox itself, is 18 inches long, and it accepts standard length firewood at 16 inches. If you have your firewood in there and it's very close to the door, especially in the initial stages of the fire getting established, it may not be pulling a draft quite as well, and you might be getting just a little bit of smoke out of either the damper or the air wash holes. You can close the damper slightly, or you can actually open the door and use something to push the firewood toward the back of the firebox just a little bit to keep that from happening. But it primarily only occurs during the initial stages. Once the firebox and the chimney itself get really hot, the heat of the chimney itself will actually pull all of the air, all of the smoke in at the front of the stove, through the damper, through the air wash holes, and it will go out the chimney. Won't be a concern. So if that's happening right at the beginning when you're getting your fire started, don't worry. It almost certainly won't continue. So once your fire is established, I know we mentioned this before, but once you get a good bed of coals, if you want to slow down the rate of burn, you can still get phenomenal heat just without it being quite so intense and without the wood burning quite so quickly. You can actually close this damper entirely. And you don't have to worry about choking the fire out because of the air wash holes. A little bit of air gets in around the ash pan as well as around the door. It's not entirely sealed. So you can get a little bit more of an even heat by closing the damper, or when you go to re-stoke the fire and you throw in a couple of large pieces of wood and you want to get those to catch really quickly, you can actually open that damper back up and that'll get them to ignite more quickly. Close it again, kind of play around with it, you know, build up that experience and see, you know, what kind of wood you're using, your environment, kind of what works for you and your style of sauna. So another thing I want to mention is the damper in the chimney. So once the fire is established, everything's drafting really well, you can also control the rate of exhaust flow out of the firebox by closing the chimney damper. Don't recommend closing it all the way, as that will just prevent the smoke from going out the chimney and it'll force it out the front of the stove. You can close it part way, you can play around with it, even if you notice there's some smoke coming out the front, you're gonna wanna open it up just a little bit. You can close it part way and that will slow down the flow out of the fire and keep a little bit more heat in the stove, in the space. So we've gone over kind of all aspects of the stove with the exception of cooling down. And so we'll cover that quick and then we'll go back and kind of highlight the main points that I tried to make. Many people ask about how hot it takes to get the sauna hot, how often you have to put in wood, what size, etc., to kind of maintain the heat. And then they also ask, like, how long does it take to cool down? So if you're going to take the sauna to the lake, to the shore, and use it at a campsite, that sort of thing, you're concerned with the overall amount of time you have to dedicate to the entire experience. And it's a little bit of a difficult question because it really depends on how much wood and what type of wood you put in the stove and at what point you're starting that question from. So if the stove is entirely full of oak, it's going to be probably several hours before the stove is cool enough to start packing up and, you know, taking away. If you can pay attention to the fire and maybe 20-30 minutes before you plan to be done using the sauna, don't put any more wood in, or just use a couple of small pieces to get that last little bit of heat that you need. Then the fire will burn down much more quickly and you'll be able to pack up and take everything down much more quickly. So once the fire itself has burned down to just a few coals, what you can do to expedite the process is fill a bucket with water, use the gloves to remove all of the rocks because they will still be quite hot. Drop those rocks into a cold bucket of water to cool down. And then you can actually remove the chimney. You can carry the stove outside. If there's any remaining embers in the firebox, you can scrape them out or even dump them out and take down the tent and all the other pieces while the stove remains cooling outside. Okay, so a few of the major points that I've tried to make in this overview of our stove is that it gets incredibly hot and you can actually overheat your sauna tent if you're not careful, especially when it's warm outside. So this stove can heat our Nova 4 sauna tent even in temperatures of 20 below. When it's 20 below outside, it'll heat it up to sauna temps. For a Nova 6, it's quite a bit larger, so we say that it's good down to about 0. Although with the full size cover on the tents, you can get that temperature down even lower. We've seen people use it in 15 below, and it still provide a satisfactory sauna experience. And these are northern Minnesotan Finns who are well versed in sauna. This isn't 130, 140 degree kind of lukewarm. We're talking real sauna temps here. So for our dome, that's our largest tent. You can actually use 2 stoves in it. And the threshold there is right around freezing. So 1 stove is sufficient down to about freezing, maybe a little bit lower if there's no wind. And then below that, you can use 2 stoves and you can heat it at essentially any temperature that you're going to be using it in. Igniting the fire, we recommend just starting off with some really small pieces of dry kindling, using a fire starter or a torch to ignite the kindling, and then adding some larger pieces. As I mentioned, you can also use the upside down method where you put the larger pieces in first, put the small pieces on the top, and let it burn kind of inverted that way. It also works very well. The biggest factor among a few in getting the maximum amount of heat out of your stove is dry wood, hands down. If you don't have dry wood, you're probably going to have a bad time. So kiln dried is best, but it doesn't have to be kiln dried. It just has to be dry. And hardwood is ideal. So dry hardwood is kind of the ideal. There are other soft woods that work just fine as long as they're dry. And then the other factors that influence the heat are obviously quantity of wood, right? More wood, more heat, and then airflow. So if you have the damper open, you get a more intense, faster burning fire, kind of a more heat in a shorter amount of time. Close the damper to slow that burn down, more even heat. So because our stove doesn't have a ton of thermal mass, you do have to keep a little bit of a closer eye on the fire, stoke it maybe every 20-30 minutes, depending on the type of wood that you're burning. Place another log or 2 in there. If it's really cold outside, maybe you need to place 3 or 4, really fill up that firebox, get that thing, a little more glowing red than usual. For anybody who's wondering, you can get a full sauna experience in from starting the fire, several hot rounds where you step out to cool down, or cold plunge, cold shower, what have you. Hot, cold rounds, and then let the stove cool down enough to pack it up and take it away in about 4 hours. So it heats up really, really fast. And if you pay attention, a little bit of preparation, you can get it to cool down pretty quickly as well. So let me know in the comments what questions I didn't answer that you'd like an answer to, and thank you for your time and attention. Happy sweating.